Bem-vindos ao podcast da Morais Leitão. David Silva Ramalho, associado coordenador, e Kyle Hilkens, especialista em criptomoeda e consultor sénior do Ministério Público holandês, falam sobre a investigação criminal em ambiente digital, sobre novas tendências no cibercrime, em particular na dark web, o uso de criptomoedas e de NFTs na prática de crimes.
So hello, my name is David Silva Ramalho. I'm here with Kyle Hilkens. He's a senior advisor to the Public Prosecutor's Office in the Netherlands. And we're going to talk a bit about cryptocurrency investigations and all the matters that Kyle deals with. So Kyle, what is it that you deal with exactly?
So my name is Kyle Hilkens. I deal with cryptocurrency on a daily basis for the Public Prosecutor's Office in the Netherlands. I have to emphasize that the things I share right here are based on my own views, not necessarily my employer's. Mm-hmm. So going from that, what I deal with on a day-to-day basis is investigations, queries by my colleagues that aren't as knowledgeable as me and my partner at the Public Prosecutor's Office. We do webinars, seminars, those kinds of things to make sure that cryptocurrency and the knowledge about it is spread more evenly throughout the Public Prosecutor's Office, but also with judges and other partners that we have in the Netherlands. So in that sense, that's our primary task. And we also advise the public prosecutors, of course, and the people they work closely with. We advise on the investigative authorities like the police. I think it's the IRS. It's called in English. Mm-hmm. And those are the main partners we work with.
Okay. So, given your specialty on the field of cryptocurrencies, which yes. I would think would be safe to say, let's start with the basics. What exactly are cryptocurrencies and how are they usually used before we go, of course, into the field of criminal investigations?
Okay. Cryptocurrencies exist in multiple forms. I mean, over the course of 2016, 17 until now, cryptocurrencies have doubled, tripled, maybe even greater numbers. I think we're looking at more than tens of thousands of cryptocurrencies at this point, not counting NFTs or anything like that, but cryptocurrencies on itself, there are so much of them, I can't even imagine how much there are. What they are, it depends, I guess, on who you ask. I mean, if I would have to tell you what they are, I would say they are a trading asset. So you can trade it for other assets, other cryptocurrencies. You can trade it for normal fiat currencies, but also for goods. I mean, you can buy stuff with it. You can buy goods online. You can purchase services with them. So it's more of like a non-tender asset that you can use to pay stuff with or do transactions with.
You mentioned tens of thousands of different cryptocurrencies. Most people hear about Bitcoin
yes.
and Ether. Are these still the main characters in this field?
Well, I guess Bitcoin is still the original one, and that is the one that it all started with in terms of that it's known by the public. Ethereum and Ether is the one that came after. If you look at the bull run from 2016-17, I would say those are the main ones. If we go from that period, there are certainly some other cryptocurrencies that have become more prevalent. I would assume Binance Smart Chain, for instance, is a cryptocurrency which is heavily used. It's a blockchain which is heavily used and which has its own cryptocurrency as well. And there are several others as well that are up there, but not quite up there with Ethereum and Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. But they're more heavily used than others as well.
Which would you say would be, after those two, the main cryptocurrencies?
That's a good question. I'm not going to be able to answer that one because if we look at it from a criminal investigation perspective, mm-hmm. Bitcoin and Ethereum are still the ones that are found the most, so more prevalent than others. It also depends which kind of investigations you do. If you look at it purely from a cryptocurrency perspective, I guess Solana is heavily used. I not necessarily think that's a cryptocurrency because of its centralized nature, but who am I to judge? And then there's also Polygon, Matic, and others.
You mentioned right now delving into the criminal investigation part. that there are uses, of course, we all know this, of cryptocurrency for criminal purposes.
Yes.
My question to you as a part of these investigations is exactly what types of criminal uses do you see the most, or are the most common with cryptocurrency?
So to start off with, the most obvious one is just normal transactions. Let's say you're a drug dealer in Colombia and you want to do transactions and you want to stay outside of the normal.
Not, but okay.
If you are outside of the normal banking structure, you could just do transaction-based trades. So I give you cryptocurrency, you send me cocaine or anything like that.
Okay.
And well, that's obviously a big one.
But that's usually on specific fields, let's call them, of the internet, right?
Oh, well, if you look at darknet markets, obviously, there's the other one as well. It's not directly, so it's not between me and you, for instance, but it's more a marketplace kind of transactions. So somebody offers certain types of substances or weapons or other services that are not the normal ones that you would expect. They are primarily paid with cryptocurrency as well, yes. So Bitcoin would be one of them, Monero would be one of them.
Of course, we all know the answer to this, but that would be for privacy purposes and to avoid having a centralized entity knowing all your transactions, right?
Yes. So it would be that, but it would also be to stay out of the crosshairs of any investigative authorities, but also because of the swift nature of it. It's kind of safe to be able to just go to a marketplace, look one of the vendors up, make sure he's trustworthy enough to send your cryptocurrencies to, and then order something from the safety of your chair or your own room, instead of having to go out to, for instance, the street to get your drugs and, well, get your fix that way.
Okay. So you mentioned drug markets, which of course take a big slice of what is the criminal use of cryptocurrencies online, but I would imagine there are others.
Yeah, so money laundering is one of them. And money laundering can happen in all kinds of different manners. Scams would be one of them. Ransomware, there was also a criminal use in ransomware, because that would be the go-to way to get paid as an individual that infects computers to make sure they get paid. Let me see others. Pump and dump schemes, those kinds of things.
What are those?
Pump and dump schemes. Those are schemes that are used to offset cryptocurrencies at a specific time. So I think we can go into two kinds of specifics. There are certain Telegram groups, for instance, that trade on markets, and they have a big following. And one of the top guys says, well, today we're going to buy cryptocurrency X. And they put that in the Telegram market, and they say, well, there's some due diligence we did, and this cryptocurrency is going to go up really big in the coming 24 hours, maybe a week. And then they tell their followers that, their followers follow them into the trade, not knowing that they probably already are in the trade. Price goes up, it starts to explode, goes up very steeply. They sell at a certain point, price goes down again. So that's kind of the pump and dump schemes. And then we also have pump and dump schemes that involve the creation of a cryptocurrency. I haven't seen those in a while, but they're certainly there. And that those are more kind of projects that say, okay, we're going to do a new cryptocurrency. We write the code for it, or we borrow the code from Bitcoin or Ethereum, or we make a token, and we put the source code on GitHub, but we omit the fact that we already have 1 million of these tokens, or 1 million of a specific cryptocurrency. People start buying them, liquidity starts to go into these cryptocurrencies, and then at a certain point they start selling them again.
Okay.
That can be at once, that can be in stages, that can be setting multiple orders, so from buying orders to selling orders.
Market manipulation.
Yes,
yeah.
Essentially.
Okay. As for the scams and for the ransomware, of course, we've seen a rise in those. Even in Portugal, we just look at the news and we see them. What exactly would you think, from a gross perspective, is the success rate of investigations going into people who use crypto for these purposes? Because what we find is that there's still a lot of crimes that go unpunished.
Yeah, that's obviously the case. I mean, if we could solve each and every crime, we would happily do so. But the fact of the matter is that you have limited resources and you have to spend your time wisely, you have to spend your money wisely, and you have to spend your capacity wisely. So in that sense, I think with each cybercrime subject maybe comes a lot of expertise that is needed to be able to investigate these kinds of crimes. And this type of expertise is not readily available everywhere. So if you look at it from the police perspective, for instance, in the Netherlands, so you have kind of a regional police, interregional police, and then the national police. And with each step you take, there is a possibility that the expertise that you need to investigate these cases increases, but also the pressure that's on them and the questions they get asked because of their expertise is much higher than with maybe, for instance, a theft. So in that sense,
why would you say that?
So well, theft is more of a crime that that doesn't require you to have some extensive knowledge of a specific cybercrime. Of a specific cybercrime, or the financial knowledge that you need to have to be able to distinguish what's wrong from right. So to distinguish, okay, this is evidence of this specific crime, or this is a trace that we need to investigate. If you don't see it, you're not going to investigate, and you're not going to find it. So that's an issue in that sense, that if you have individuals that are not trained to see cryptocurrency, you're never going to see it. So you're never going to solve the crime, or you're partially going to solve the crime, but you won't find cryptocurrency, for instance.
Okay, so if you have a case, one of those cases, I understand there are different ways of investigating different cases, of course, but when something is put on an investigator's desk and you have a Bitcoin address, you have a Bitcoin transaction ID, where do you start? What do you do? What does an investigator do?
So this, like I said, depends on the knowledge of the person that gets this report. So for instance...
So perhaps I should ask, what should they do?
Yes, because the reality is, if you encounter someone that doesn't have the knowledge to recognize that it's a cryptocurrency-related crime, or that cryptocurrency is evidence or a trace in these crimes, then you're not going to be able to find anything. So what should you do is contact somebody that actually knows the subject. So that's the obvious step one, but I should mention that step because it's more often than not, it's not done.
Yeah, it's skipped frequently. Right?
Yeah, so it's skipped, and then somewhere along the way, somebody who has knowledge over financial investigations or has knowledge about cryptocurrency comes along and says, we've been at this case for like 3 months or anything like that. And then in that sense, they are drawn in because they ask themselves the question, why haven't they looked at this?
Yes, so in some ransomware cases, I would imagine they may be attributed to some extortion division of a given police or public prosecutor's office. And so that will lead them to use old-fashioned investigative methods instead of doing cybercrime investigative methods, particularly cryptocurrency-related measures.
And even there's a discussion on whether or not cryptocurrency is cybercrime or not. I mean, cryptocurrency in a sense is just another asset that is usable by criminals and normal people, by the way, to do their trade, to make sure their money goes from A to B, and somewhere along the way lose the paper trail.
But it is frequent that you're absolutely right, of course. But it is frequent that cryptocurrency is combined with cybercrime, with ransomware, what you mentioned, with scams, and this is of course for hiding one's identity, of course, hiding the transactions, and as you mentioned, allowing for them to go below the radar.
Yeah.
But if you get a case as an investigator and you do that first step, you call someone who knows what they're doing, who knows what a transaction ID is, who knows what a Bitcoin address is, who looks at that QR code and knows this has to do with a given cryptocurrency. I would imagine the first step would be to know which cryptocurrency, of course. It may not only be Bitcoin, though frequently it would be.
Yeah.
So what is it that they they should do from your perspective?
So from my perspective, the first things that you should do if you have an address, because that is the most obvious trace of cryptocurrency usage or misusage in a sense, you should go and look at tools you have available to you. So for instance, you can go online, use blockchain.com or blockchain.com or any other of these websites. For Ethereum, it is either Etherscan, and look at the address. See what happened with this address. Is it an address that is from a victim of a crime? Is it an address that we can identify as used by a criminal or suspect? And then go from there. So look at the type of cryptocurrency you have, determine what are the heuristics in which you can trace it, and then go from there.
Okay, so you investigate a transaction. You're talking about, of course, blockchain-based currencies, so you can follow the transaction. You go, you try to look into the past, right? You try to look into where this transaction came from.
Or where it's going.
Or where it's going, okay.
Yes, because both are equally interesting in that sense. If we go into the past, we probably get to some point where it's coming from a darknet market, or it comes from something else in which you're interested in. But the interesting part is more where it's going. Is it going to an exchange? Is it going to a co-conspirator? Is it going to somebody else? Is he paying somebody? Can you generate leads that give you more of a hook into a place where you can get more information? You could get an identity, probably maybe from somebody else, from a suspect, from another suspect, or from somebody who is a witness, because it isn't necessarily so that if a suspect makes a transaction to somebody else, that they are co-conspirators in their crime. They can also just be paying somebody else for a service or something else. Or
they can be sending, for example, selling cryptocurrency to someone who doesn't know they are buying, for example, the crypto.
Yes.
Or if you investigate, and of course I have mostly the defense's point of view, but I think they combine adequately. If you have, if you go many hops behind in a given transaction, you will most likely, sooner or later, find a transaction that comes from a given unlawful origin. In any case, this does not mean that the person you're investigating has something to do with that, because the same way when you get a bill in the coffee, you don't know if this bill came 3 or 4 transactions ago from someone selling drugs in the street.
It all depends on the context.
Exactly. So you need to interpret, first of all, you follow the transaction, and then you interpret it according to a given...
You try to interpret, because so transactions in their context are not necessarily... They're kind of like... how should I put this? They're neutral. They're neutral until you can put something else next to it, or combine it with other evidence you have that says otherwise, or it says this person is, it's not his transaction. That's a possibility. It just was found in the vicinity, or in within a search. It was found, but it's not from this specific suspect. Or you find something that does say that it's from that specific suspect. So you always need to have more evidence to color these transactions you see. So it's not cryptocurrency in that sense. So the transactions and where it's going and where it came from. It also needs other evidence. And itself, it's just support evidence.
Yeah, so you need to interpret it according to both the narrative that is the accusation's narrative and the narrative from the defense's point of view as well, I would imagine.
Yeah.
If the defense points towards a lawful origin of the crypto, for example, would you consider it interesting for the public prosecutor to investigate it?
Of course. I mean, normally it would be innocent until proven guilty, and with incriminating evidence, and you research that, you also need to look at evidence that absolves a potential suspect from the crime they are charged with. So my opinion is you have to look at it from both sides, because you're looking at the truth. You're looking for the truth, and not necessarily to put this specific person behind bars.
But when you are doing this investigation, usually, I mean, Bitcoin transactions are not from one point to the other, and then from this point to the other. You have each wallet has several addresses. Each address may have a given balance that goes to another address. And so when you are looking at this, if you do a research strictly on blockchain.com, you will find yourself with a lot of different...
With a lot of noise.
A lot of noise.
Yeah, you're not knowing what you're looking at.
Yes, and then ultimately it's hard to see the big picture that perhaps this whole number of addresses will lead to a given direction, and maybe this whole number of transactions may have been pre-planned. And so, or even that these transactions are going to different directions, of course. So when you have so many addresses, as usually happen in big investigations, how do you deal with them and how do you do this research?
So this comes back to what you find. I mean, if a suspect is apprehended and brought into custody, there will be a search. The search goes through their homes, through their cars, vehicles, work addresses, in the search of something that points to the crime the person is accused of committing or not, and by that means absolving them from that crime. But if you have a lot of them, for instance, you find a mnemonic phrase. You put that in, you can extract all of the different addresses that are in there.
Perhaps before continuing, and given that not everyone knows what a mnemonic phrase or a seed,
seed phrase. So the seed phrase is mostly a 12 or 24 words that are written in a specific order, which comprise the private key, and that private key makes the other public keys.
So what this means is that if somehow you seize a computer where a wallet is stored, if the suspect has the paper with 12 or 24 words called the seed, he can then regain access to that wallet, recreate it, and then send the money, of course, the virtual currency to a different direction, right?
Yeah, you can also confiscate, obviously, because the seed phrase is used as a last-ditch backup if you lose any of the access to it. So, for instance, if I have a wallet and my phone gets tossed off this beautiful 11-story building, it's broken, I can't access it anymore. There aren't any other ways for me to access my cryptocurrency. That is my last resort to get access back from the blockchain. So it reads the information from the blockchain and you have access to it again to make sure you can do transactions.
So this is something the investigators should always look for, which is a number of random words which may go unnoticed to the untrained eye.
So that's the same example as I said before. If you have somebody who does not know what to look for, you're not going to find it.
I would imagine that when you are doing some investigation with cryptocurrency and you need to follow the trail of a given transaction with all those addresses that you usually have, it would be easier to have tools to make this map, this tree of transactions that you see, I would imagine. I mean, I know there are some tools that are available online if you pay a given sum. Other tools are only available for law enforcement, of course. But would you consider these tools useful for your work? And is it something that it's usually done by investigators?
Yeah, so tools make the job easier, obviously. And they provide other information as well. I mean, the products that are on the market give you insight into, for instance, what addresses are clustered with each other. So, for instance, if a Bitcoin address co-spends, this tooling can tell you, okay, this address has co-spent with the following address, which means they belong to the same wallet. So this obviously makes your job a lot easier because you can then say, based on the clustering that occurred, means that we can now identify two addresses instead of just one.
When you mentioned clustering, you mentioned tools that allow you to attribute certain Bitcoin addresses to the same origin, right?
Yes, through various means. I'm not completely aware of how they do it exactly, but co-spending is one of them.
Co-spending, when you mean co-spending, are Bitcoin addresses that that make transactions to the same destination, Bitcoin addresses that you can somehow attribute to the same origin?
Yes, so for, Bitcoin is UTXO based, which is inputs. So if I have one Bitcoin and I transfer it to you, you have one Bitcoin on one of these addresses. If you need two Bitcoin, you would have to have another address that has another Bitcoin on it, or get another one on the address I've already sent you one to. If you have then 2.5 Bitcoins, for instance, on two different addresses in the same wallet, if you do a payment for two to somebody else, then they co-spend. And in that sense, you can say these two addresses belong to the same wallet, which means they belong to the same person that is controlling this.
Okay, and also you can, through Bitcoin heuristics, find out if a third Bitcoin address, for example, can be the change address, and you can attribute it to the same origin.
So yes, humans are funny beings in that sense. We always like to make exact payments. We don't like to make payments in the sense of I pay you 5.34789 Bitcoin. No, we want to make sure it's round. So change heuristics mean I have some tools in my toolkit. So what I get learned, if I see a transaction that has a round number, it's probably a payment. And the other Bitcoin that comes from it to a change address is the change address.
But do you search the round number as a cryptocurrency round number or as a fiat currency round number? Because sometimes it's 5,000 euros and that would be point something Bitcoin.
They can be both. But normally, and like I said, this is in most cases, when somebody makes a payment or does something else and it's a round number or it's 2 decimals, then you can attribute some kind of value to it. You can say, okay, this is a payment, this is a change address, and then go from there. It's all probabilistic. So the probability that something is a payment or a change address determines which path you can follow. And at some point, you're going to have to stop. That's what I said. It always has to be supporting evidence, because if the trail goes on long enough, you start to question whether or not this is still the same person that's making these transactions.
And if somehow in the middle of those transactions you have, for example, a coin join transaction, you can be deceived by thinking that a second address with a lower amount is a change address, and it may be someone else's address.
Yeah, so coin join is maybe also something that needs explanation. So if you would like to, but I don't think...
Yeah, but what I mean is that when you mention that it's probabilistic, sometimes it's not accurate. So sometimes you assume that a given address belongs to a given origin, but it may have a different explanation. Right?
Yeah, so the data has exact signs, but the interpretation of it isn't.
Yeah,
it's based on the knowledge of the investigator that's investigating this crime. And in the end, they have to write a report. It has to go to a judge, and the judge has to look at it and see if he can follow the things that have been put in this report, and then go from there.
But do you think that most judges feel the need to be assisted by someone like yourself who is well-versed in these areas of cryptocurrency?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of any judges.
Of course.
So I don't know what knowledge level they have. I think it would be a good idea if they encounter these things and have questions about it, that they get the experts to make sure they know what they're looking at. Mm-hmm. And normally when a report is made, the investigator obviously puts a lot of effort in it. It depends on his knowledge level, or if he writes it down in a certain manner that also a judge can comprehend it and also interpret it the same as he intends to put it forth. But I think if they're looking at complex cases, it's always a good idea to have somebody that can explain these kinds of transactions to them.
Of course. We've been speaking mostly, even though we haven't been saying the name, mostly on Bitcoin transactions. But we also have Ether, which is one of the largest cryptocurrencies as well. Do you see also a use of this cryptocurrency for criminal purposes?
Well, Ethereum is I'm not sure if it is the biggest altcoin, but it was the biggest altcoin. And in terms of Ethereum itself, I'm not quite sure if I can say that is primarily used or for criminal purposes. But what you do see is that all of the tokens you can put onto Ethereum and onto the blockchain, so those coins get used by suspects, criminals, for certain purposes. So for instance, creating a token, an ERC20 token, for instance, which is like a new cryptocurrency on the Ethereum blockchain. This token can be used for pump and dump schemes, for instance. Or this token can be used to scam other people out of their money by rug pulling. And then there are also NFTs, because there are different type of token on Ethereum. It's called ERC721, I believe. NFTs can also be used for money laundering.
Okay.
But there is also a use case for these kind of tokens that is non-criminal.
When you say NFTs are used also for money laundering, I mean, we've all heard about NFTs, about the monkeys that you buy and
The Bored Ape Yacht Clubs.
exactly. And people don't fully understand why some are paying for it, but this is something that is, of course, applicable to all art, or some art at least. And so, have you seen cases, or do you know of cases of NFT use for money laundering?
So, if you look at how the subject on cryptocurrency evolves from its origin, I mean, Bitcoin obviously has started way back in 2012, 2013. And those are the origin years. If you look at it from that perspective, investigative authorities are only now catching up to those kinds of transactions and to Ethereum transactions. So NFTs is obviously a topic which they are also looking at. You need a certain amount of expertise again to understand what's going on. But I've seen examples in the space, in the community itself, which are used for criminal purposes, yes. So scams, rug pulls, those kinds of things, making a collection of tens of thousands of NFTs, selling them, promising on certain utility, and then when the money has been collected, they just pull out of the project and are gone with the wind.
Okay.
So NFTs are certainly used for criminal purposes, yes. And money laundering in itself is also possible because, I mean, if you look at how NFTs are sold and bought, the marketplaces of most of the marketplaces are just anonymous. You log in with your wallet, and obviously a wallet is not normally connected to an identity. You put the NFT up for sale, somebody buys it, and then they all go their separate ways again. But can also be possible that the person who is selling is also the person who is buying. Okay. So then you can get wash trading and those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. And we've seen a switch from the use of normal cryptocurrency, or most well-known cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and Ethereum, we've seen a switch to Monero and privacy coins. Mm-hmm. And in order to make transactions on the blockchain that is hidden. Mm-hmm. This happened with the new alphabet, happened with White House Market. This keeps happening on drug markets online, and of course it is used in different markets. Have you felt, or do you think that this puts a significant challenge to criminal investigations?
So the cryptocurrencies you've just mentioned are designed with privacy in mind. So in that sense, they have the sole purpose of ensuring privacy for their users. So yes, it's more difficult for investigative authorities to investigate cases in which they have been used. On the other hand, there are also ways to deconstruct some of these transactions, and their origins can become public again, or not public, but can be known to investigative authorities. So it's a kind of a cat and mouse game between criminals and the people that are trying to catch them, and how they are able to dodge them or how they are able to catch them. It's constantly evolving.
And between the techniques that have been used, we've heard a lot about chain hopping as well. Is this also a problem for investigations, or? It
depends. If you have an investigator that has knowledge about Bitcoin only and knows how to follow Bitcoin, but might not know how to follow transactions in Ethereum and all the tokens that exist on Ethereum, then it can become a problem. If you have an investigator that is knowledgeable on all these kinds of topics, then hiding through chain hopping is, well, it doesn't guarantee the result you're probably hoping for when you have a criminal purpose to do chain hopping. It's nothing else than going from one to the other one, to the other one, to the other one. But in essence, it's still a transaction that goes into a service that allows you to pull out another cryptocurrency, which is traceable, then goes into another cryptocurrency, which is also traceable. But the effort it takes can be different.
Again, depending on the tools that you have.
Yes, depending on the tools that you have and also the capabilities that you have as an investigator to query certain of these services to see whether or not you can get, for instance, IP addresses and those kinds of things, or transaction hashes for blockchain research.
So in this cat and mouse game that you mentioned, what would you say would be the biggest challenges a criminal investigator faces now in cryptocurrency investigations?
I think keeping up with the knowledge to see the new things happening and the ways criminals use the possibilities they have on the blockchain and with cryptocurrencies to be able to obfuscate what they're doing.
So, but for keeping up, I would imagine you have to go in the places where these things are talked about.
Yes.
So frequently, you may find something on Reddit, on those places,
Reddit and
GitHubs, and
Bitcoin Talk was ages ago, but yes, those kinds of forums.
Yes, but sometimes you have to go to other types of forums. Sometimes you have to go, for example, on the dark web, for example, to see what people are actually doing. Is this a sort of a criminal investigative step that should be taken for the purpose of keeping up?
Well, I think you need to look at what the trends are. It's impossible to keep up with everything. I mean, I have quite some knowledge of cryptocurrency, and I don't know everything as well. There are certain areas that I'm not proficient at, which my colleague is more proficient at, and there's some areas where I have more knowledge than my colleague does. But I think as an investigative authority, and also as the public prosecutor's office, and also judges, you need to keep up with the main trends. So, for instance, 2016, 17, Bitcoin made a name for itself. The price went up massively. Ethereum came up. You need to look at those things and educate yourself on what's happening and what impact does this have on my profession and on the daily activities I do to make sure I can catch criminals or that I can investigate the traces that I have. And then fast forwarding from 2017, 2018 till now, DeFi, so decentralized finance, is something you should be aware of. NFTs is something you should be aware of. You should be aware of the opportunities it gives certain individuals to stay one step ahead. And not everyone should do that. So I'm not asking anybody, everyone in for instance, a police unit to know about these things, but there should be somewhere a point of knowledge that knows about this stuff or knows how to redirect you to somebody else that does know about any of the trends happening.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kyle. I think we pretty much ran out of time. Thank you for your talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.